Perimenopause is an event that starts in the brain. We all think it comes from our ovaries. Our brain tells us what to do, tells our ovaries what to do. Because money hasn't been put into women's health, we've been treated like little men, and that's just not the case at all. Even the nutritional information, I like to lift, do resistance training and stuff. My PT said we used to just roll out what worked for men. Now we actually realize it just doesn't work. We're just so different.
Welcome to Your Second Act, the podcast that proves that life doesn't have to end at 40, 50, or even 60, because when it comes to living your best life, age is just a number. Hey, lovely people, thanks so much for joining me on another episode of Your Second Act. A few weeks ago, I mentioned that I interviewed a clinical psychologist on the show who specialises in all things menopause. Kirstin joined me for an eye-opening discussion I thought I had a lot of knowledge on. But after chatting with her, I realised that I have been definitely keeping myself in the dark, thinking that menopause was something I didn't need to know more about. And considering I've already gone through it, well, what was the point? But I was so wrong. Since speaking to her, I've been to my GP and I've asked her to put me on HRT, because why should I miss out on all the goodness that it brings to my mind and my body? And I know that HRT can be controversial, but after listening to her, I realised the benefits of taking it, especially in this stage of life. So I'll let you guys make up your own minds, because after you listen to this episode, I think you'll change your mind, and I'd be really interested to know your thoughts. So please do let me know. Now, be sure to tune in next week to part 2 of this episode, because we ran out of time and I had a whole lot of questions from the listeners. So she'll be addressing those questions next week. And just a side note, I've launched a private Facebook community page that I would love for you all to join, called Embrace Your Second Act for Women in Their Midlife. It's a place where we can discuss anything and everything, because it's a closed group. So please click the link in the show notes to join. And now let's get ready for our very mind-blowing discussion with Kirstin Bouse. Hi, Kirstin. Welcome so much to Your Second Act. As a perimenopausal clinical psychologist, you've navigated the challenges of this wonderful transitional phase firsthand. And your mission to revolutionize healthcare by empowering professionals to become menopause experts is truly inspiring through your initiative All About Her, and I can't wait to hear more about that. But recently I was chatting with a group of women and we just started talking about our menopause symptoms. And it really surprised me how many of us are still in the dark. And I thought, this is crazy. And a lot of them were saying, I'm just too embarrassed to ask that question to my GP. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go out to my Instagram community and I'm just going to say, look, send in any question you have anonymously, and I'm going to bring on an expert. And I did hear your podcast with the lovely Jo from Redefining Midlife.
Yes.
And I thought, she's the lady to come on. So thank you so much. I have a lot of questions and I can't wait to hear your answers, and you're definitely the person to ask. So welcome so much.
Thank you. Well, I feel really fortunate because I can talk about this topic very, very happily for hours. It's definitely a life stage that has had a big impact on me and a lot of my friends. And I guess, obviously clients and things. And so with many of the frustrations that came for me personally in trying to understand what was happening for me and trying to get help and, accurate information and all the rest, and then hearing the same kind of challenges. My friends had the same challenges and clients, would have the same challenges. And I was also trying to then kind of send them to GPs to, get support for their menopausal symptoms, or at least have a conversation about it. And so many GPs are also very ill-informed. I just got really quite jack of it.
Why do you think that is? I mean, every woman is going to go through this. So why aren't they better informed? What is it?
Well, that's a really great question. And I've got some really wonderful GPs that I can refer to, and not just in Perth where I'm from, and they will kind of respond. So there's a simple answer, and one is the training for GPs in menopause, I think, is at best a single lecture, and it's not very long. That's it. And if you think about, GPs, time has passed, they need to know more and more and more and more and more. And to be honest, and, I'm not, crystal balling this, but I do have a bit of a sense that over time, what you're going to see, what we're going to see is funnily enough, GP specialist clinics, a lot more. In Perth, we've got a couple of women's health. So that's all they deal with. Colleagues of mine have just set up perimenopause, and they only deal with things like PMDD and perimenopause and menopause and things. No other GPE, nothing else. And I also know a number of pediatric GPs, so they will only see children. So I think that's going to happen more and more because they just need to know more than they possibly can. So that's the first thing. But sadly, if you look historically, that any kind of women's health issue, I mean, if you go way, way back, the word hysteria has always been attached to women. Neurotic has been attached to women. And so, unfortunately, this patriarchal system that has been around for a long time that we live in has just been dismissive of our health. And that's also then meant that we haven't actually been included in health research until the last decade, a little bit more, maybe 15 years or so. And a really classic example of that is something like heart attacks. Now, that any gender can have a heart attack, but because the research has only been done on men for a long time, they actually didn't realize that women were at far greater risk, particularly midlife women. And secondly, they also didn't know that the signs of heart attacks for women were different from men because we weren't included in the research. And we weren't included in the research because we're difficult to research because we have these things called hormones and periods that just make us all very kind of challenging as time.
Wow.
I know. And
that's incredible.
Yeah. So, so that's very, very real. And, we're really, I mean, in some cases, they weren't even doing research on female mice. It's extensive. There's some books on the medical history, and, in terms of how women were forgotten. There's also people have written books about how our buildings, our streets, our phones, women haven't been included. The size of an iPhone has been determined by the size of men's hands, not women. It permeates.
I'm blown away by this. This is what?
My poor sons and my partner, of like, don't get us started on this topic. But it is very, very real, let alone putting money into female-specific health issues. That's only very, very recent. So we've just been in the dark. Now it is happening, and we actually realize because our reproductive hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, we have receptors for them everywhere in our body. And we also, perimenopause is an event that starts in the brain. We all think it comes from our ovaries, but our brain tells us what to do, tells our ovaries what to do. And so menopause is what they're actually calling a neuroendocrine event, which means it's happening. It's a neurological hormonal event. That's the trigger. And, our brain kind of tells every part of us what to do. So it's one reason why the impact of perimenopause and menopause is systemic, because we have these receptors all over our body. But yeah, we've only kind of just started to know that stuff because money hasn't been put into women's health. We've been treated like little men, and that's just not the case at all. at all. Even the nutritional information. I like to lift heavy and things, do resistance training and stuff. I know my PT said we used to just roll out what worked for men, and not that we thought it was just for men. We rolled out what the most current research would say is the best way to kind of gain strength, lose weight, blah, blah, blah. And she said, now we actually realize that it just doesn't work for women the way it works for men. We're just so different. So that is
I
why
am shocked.
that's a long answer, but
I'm just shocked. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's a really important thing.
Do you think, I'm just looking at the word menopause, menstruation. What the hell? It's got nothing to do with that.
I know.
And, and they can say, yes, but we're the ones who have to deal with you going through that.
Don't get me started.
I mean, wow. I know. I'm not even going to tell my daughters about what you've just said because they will freak out because they're so against. Oh,
yes.
My gosh. Yeah, but it blows my mind that even today it's still like that. Obviously it's improved, but it's just defies belief, doesn't it? I mean, how can it be that way?
What's really exciting, I think, is if you think kind of back to a couple of, like a generation, maybe one more ago, they burned the bra. They, created waves enough so that we got to vote. We could open our own bank accounts and get our own credit cards and loans.
And not that long ago, really,
no,
was it?
I'm a 74 baby, so I'm 50 this year. And the reason it sticks in my mind is because it was in 1974 that women were able to get finance or a credit card or a bank account on their own.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So you can see where I get obsessed and stuff. But,
yes, absolutely.
That's because of the women before us paved the way for those changes. They paved the way for us to have careers as well and all of that stuff. And for that, I'm truly, truly grateful. What I see happening is Gen X women are really kicking up a storm about how we haven't been included in research, how the world is not designed for us, the patriarchal structure, the role expectations that women have that men don't have. Like, we are really a very powerful force, which is really exciting to me. And I think that, systemic and social change takes many, many generations. So I'm not, we're not going to completely dismantle the patriarchy anytime soon. But I do believe that my daughter, your girls, will have a different experience of perimenopause and menopause because of the things that we're doing now as a collective generation. Now, like the one before us, they did awesome things in terms of we've now been able to have a career. What they couldn't perhaps have foreseen is that, yes, great, we get to have a career, but nothing's changed. We're still expected to run a home and care for everyone and all the rest. So they did a wonderful thing without knowing that there was just going to be an extra thing that we were going to be adding to our lives, and there weren't going to be these other changes to better accommodate that addition. So I know we're not going to get it 100% right. Like, we do the best we can. Sometimes we can anticipate consequences that aren't great and we can plan for them. Other times there's unintended consequences. So, when our girls get to this stage, I think things will be very different in a good way. But yeah, maybe there will be more work to be done, I guess, is what I'm saying. But we're a generation that's going to kick and rant and make a change.
Yeah. That's right. And then this new generation, they're just equipped with all this information and they won't let it die. They're just going to keep going and keep fighting for what we should be included in. So I think people like yourself, so you've started All About Her. I mean, fantastic. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so All About Her was really born out of my own frustration in finding, I've got quite a number of degrees. I've got a strong science background. I'm a clinical psychologist coming up to 3 decades. I'm well resourced, and I still found it difficult to find accurate information about what was happening for me. And the reason it was hard is because there's so much, there was and kind of still is contradictory information. It's like, so you have to go that extra level to work out, well, which piece of information has some evidence base behind it, has some robust evidence base behind it. Now, I could do that, and I did do that, but I'm like, what about other women who don't have the time, who don't have the resources, who are also, even if they do have the resources previously, perimenopause can be a time when your brain stops working very well, and it can be really, really difficult. And so you're not your best self. And so to do things that you might have been able to do previously, which is to educate yourself, advocate for yourself, those kinds of things, you're just not as capable. So that was definitely one thing. And then, I guess I'm happy to share bits of my story. So I had an ablation because of fibroids and just yuck periods and stuff in my maybe about 30s when I was 37. And that was great for a couple of years. But I was also told your lining will grow back. You're too young, to be hitting menopause in the next few years. It did. Those problems amped up again. I'd had all my kids. So I had a hysterectomy at 42. I kept my ovaries.
Very young.
Yeah. Best thing I ever did, though. But I kept my ovaries. Off I went. In hindsight, I know that I went into perimenopause very soon after. And very current research has actually shown that even if you keep your ovaries, you will likely go into perimenopause on average 4 years earlier, and therefore also menopause 4 years earlier than had you have not had everything else removed. So often previously it was thought, if you've got your ovaries, you're still on track. The average age of an Australian woman to hit menopause is about 51, 52. Back then we were naive. We kind of really didn't talk about perimenopause. Those who were a lot more informed, the very small minority of health professionals, might have thought you start perimenopause in your late 40s, so that by the time, you're 51, 52, you hit menopause, the next day you're actually postmenopausal. So that was the understanding. So I had this surgery. Nobody said anything to me about this possibility. There was some research, just not enough, I guess. And it was many, many years down the track, after I suffered for a couple of years with probably one of the most classic symptoms. But in the meantime, let me say my marriage ended and stuff. So that was obscuring some symptoms and things, shitty sleep, stress, all that kind of thing. But one of the symptoms that I had was vaginal dryness. And I remember going to my doctor and saying, what's going on? Like, this is not normal. And I got the usual use lube. And this is a very frank conversation. But this is happening for me during the day. This isn't happening during any intimate moment. I don't have a problem in an intimate moment. This is me walking around the world with a very, very sore vagina. And because I'd also started a new relationship, I got sent for all these STD tests again, the same ones again and again. And I'm like, it's not that. Got sent to the gynecologist who did my hysterectomy. He's like, I don't know. So
Really?
Yep. So I kind of struggled with that probably until I was about 45. And then one day, and I'm actually in this house and I'm sitting near the room I was in, I was saying to my kids, I am really sick of whinging to you kids, whinging about my terrible sleep. I didn't tell them about my dry vagina at that point, but I have since because I'm the mum that talks about things that other mums don't talk about. But that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, great.
My kids are going to be educated on lots of different things. I was like, I'm so sick of whinging about my terrible sleep. I sound just like Nan when she was my age. Light bulb. I'm like, oh my God, this is what it is. And I know my mum's generation, like she's heading towards 81. Most of that generation didn't talk about this stuff. But my mum was a nurse. So anything to do with your health was something, I mean, she didn't bang on about it, but, you know, as a teenager, I knew, she told us, I knew what was happening for her and things, because she was just matter of fact about that stuff. Hence me being able to join the dots. So then I went to my GP, the same GP, and I said, I think this is what's going on. And she was like, oh, I'm not too sure. I was also having a low mood for the first time ever in my life, ever. And so she put me on antidepressants. Hated those, and they didn't help. And so I pushed to go on MHT, and I went on MHT, and it wasn't this groundbreaking.
Can I ask?
Yep.
What's MHT?
Oh, sorry. So MHT is what used to be called HRT. So hormone replacement therapy. They changed the language around it because there was this idea that they're not actually replacing our hormones. Like when you take MHT, so menopause hormone therapy, you're not taking it in a dose that actually kind of gives you the same amount that you would have had during your reproductive years, essentially. And so for that reason, I guess they've changed the language. So I started that. It wasn't groundbreaking. I was like, oh, is it, you know, it's quite expensive. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to continue this. In amongst that, I got an ADHD diagnosis. And again, there's a whole explanation why a lot of women at this stage are getting ADHD diagnosis. And it's because of the relationship between the hormones and neurotransmitters that are relevant for ADHD, really like estrogen. And so when your estrogen starts declining, then I guess the challenges of ADHD can become more obvious.
Wow, that's really interesting, because a friend of mine recently has just been diagnosed with ADHD, and for her, it's been a revelation. And she said, I can't believe this. I actually understand my brain now. But there are a lot of women in our age group that are getting this diagnosis. And it's like, why all of a sudden is this happening? So that's really interesting.
It is. And so I guess what I can say, again, another area where not enough research has been done. So firstly, just like any kind of neurodivergence, ADHD and autism, the research has all been based on boys. Again, this is where we've been overlooked. And it shows up differently in girls. Both of those neurodevelopmental differences show up differently in girls and therefore in women. So it's often been typically, again, diagnosed. If they've had any troubles and had any diagnosis, it's likely they've been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. And it's a bit tricky because that actually might be true, because living as an ADHDer or as an autistic person who's undiagnosed actually is a difficult life, can be quite challenging. So it can definitely lead to genuine anxiety and depression for sure. But it's not the whole picture. And so a lot of women who have had those diagnoses, you know, as I said, perimenopause with a reduction in estrogen and dopamine. Dopamine's particularly relevant for ADHD. So it's not got, you know, the estrogen that it normally likes. And so the wheels really start to come off at that point. So that's why that's happening. The research we have in that very specific area is super, super new. It's only just starting. But what we do have a little bit of, and I think you're probably looking maybe 2 5 years old, so still quite new, is girls who've been diagnosed with ADHD in their childhood or adolescent years, quite rare, you know, small numbers compared to boys, just because it looks different. But nonetheless, those that do have often reported that their ADHD medication becomes less effective at different times in their cycle, in their menstrual cycle. And that's when the estrogen drops, that point in the cycle. And so for a long time, they're like, I have to take more of what I would normally take, or, you know, I just take the same dose, but I know that at this time, you know, I'm actually every month around for this period of time, at this time in my cycle, I'm going to be, you know, have more challenges. I'm going to be a lot less organized. I'm going to have difficulties with attention. I'm going to have emotional dysregulation challenges, more extreme. So because we've got a little bit of that research more around the menstrual cycle, it then is now starting to be kind of, oh, we need to look at perimenopause, because that's probably one of the reasons why ADHD is being diagnosed in midlife women more. So the other reason being, we used to use the criteria for boys and things, and it just doesn't necessarily manifest that way. That's one thing. So we're starting to learn more about how ADHD and autism shows up in girls and women. That's one thing. And then the second thing is the cycle stuff, as I said, hormonal cycle and impact. So, yeah.
Which makes sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess for me, having that diagnosis and then of ADHD and then, bringing the medication into it, again, wasn't a groundbreaking. Some people say, oh, my God, as soon as I'm on my medication, like your friend, it's life-changing. And what I found is the combination of MHT and my ADHD medication is what's really, really important. It's either miraculous? No, I'm 7-8 years into perimenopause and my sleep is still terrible no matter what I do. And I've just started with hot flashes. I haven't had them until probably the last 6-9 months. And funnily enough,
they're fun, aren't they?
Yeah, they're fun. And I get hot flashes in bed. So I wouldn't say I get night sweats. I don't sweat, but I wake up very, very quickly, just so hot and things. So, and I think that's one of the things that I like to really educate women about is the evolution of the symptoms. So we don't know how long we're going to be in perimenopause for. It's anything from 5 to 15 years generally, which means if if your reproductive system hasn't been removed in any shape or form, and we're looking at the average woman being 51, 52, that's why perimenopause can start in your late 30s. If you hit menopause before you're 40, so I mean proper menopause, not perimenopause, then that that has so many layers to it because sometimes women haven't had children and things like that, and they've wanted to. That's often referred to as premature ovarian insufficiency. So it's possible to go into full menopause earlier if you have your ovaries out and you aren't postmenopausal, because sometimes that happens postmenopausal, but you're postmenopausal. But if it's before then, you will go into menopause straight away. And then there are some medications that people need to be on, typically for things like breast cancer, that will put women immediately into menopause as well. So they skip perimenopause and go straight into menopause, which is super, super intense. Yeah, they're just hit with everything. So that's why for those women who are experiencing one of those three things I've just mentioned, they can often be a lot younger as well. And so now they're also starting to include women like myself who may have a hysterectomy but keep their ovaries. So you don't go straight into menopause, but it's highly likely you'll go into perimenopause.
Do you think there's a connection? I've heard this for a long time. If your mother went through menopause at a certain age, then more than likely you'll probably go through it around the same age, or is that just a myth?
I guess what I've read is I've read, kind of both things like no and then yes. I guess if you keep everything equal, for example, so, you're like my mum had a hysterectomy after I was born. So she was in her some years after, not many, but some years after. So maybe in her early 30s, again, kept her ovaries and stuff. So whereas my sister's had none of that kind of stuff. And she's 54 and still perimenopausal, She also hasn't hit menopause yet, despite being the age that she actually is. So her experience has been entirely different from mine and entirely different from our mums. But I guess if your mum's kind of ticked along and there's been no gynecological history, surgeries, need for medication, as I said, that puts you into menopause, like nothing like that. And you've tracked that same path as well. She's had children. You've also had children. I think those factors come into it. Then, yeah, I've definitely read that there could be that possibility of having a similar experience. But I've also read at the same time, no, so Yeah, a GP might, like a menopause informed GP might be able to answer that question with a little bit more confidence one way or the other, but that's my knowledge base at this point in time.
Something that's come up, people that, like myself, I basically, when I turned 50, I had my very last period.
Woo!
And then I know, which is amazing. But then you hear these stories of, well, you don't have those hormones anymore. So you're going to age at a quicker rate than someone who is still going through it. Can you answer that? Is it true?
So I can't really, and it depends what we're calling aging. Okay. How do we define aging? So let me backtrack a little bit, to kind of then lead into answering this as best I can. So the first thing is that we actually do still have hormones. We will have all these hormones for the rest of our lives. They're just at much, much lower levels. That's the really significant thing. But the other thing is there's actually 3 types of estrogen. The estrogen that is the juiciest and the best for, I guess, for our health and probably what helps us look, pretty good in those years. And I'm pretty sure it's E2. And that's what they would call the kind of fertility. It's fertility related. So this is the hormone that we have during our menstrual life, right? So it kicks off when we're going through puberty, and it's the one that takes center stage. It's also the one that declines. E3, I'm pretty sure it's E3, is the hormone that starts to take center stage when we're pregnant. And E1 is the one that kind of tracks along forever. So E1 is the one that we will always have. It's been there from the get-go. But these other 2, obviously one's very, is pregnancy related, and then one's very much our fertile years, which of course is the one that is really depleting. And unfortunately, it's the one that's, as I said, the best for us. Estrogen is very anti-inflammatory, and a lot of the disease conditions are around inflammation in the body. So we're losing our buffer. The other thing we know that is that estrogen buffers cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And so as our estrogen declines, our stress hormone increases. So it's a bit like a seesaw. And that's even if nothing in your life changes. So if everything stays the same in terms of what might cause stress and get your cortisol going, and stress isn't just a busy life. Stress could be you did ultra marathons and stuff. That puts stress on your body, and things. And if nothing changes except our estrogen's declining, our cortisol is going to be going up. So that's why we are less capable of or more susceptible to the stress hormone, and maybe less capable in terms of managing stress levels and things like that. So we've got to work harder to keep our cortisol down, which is an interesting concept, isn't it? We've got to work harder to try and, be less stressed. But that's super, super important. But going back to estrogen, because it's this lovely anti-inflammatory thing, we know it's really relevant to our health, which is why, again, because of newer research, women are at far greater risk than men from midlife onwards in terms of cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, of course, like bone health problems, diabetes, I even think, and we also now know dementia and Alzheimer's, because we're losing this kind of thing. So if you look at aging from the perspective of health conditions, yes, as we start to really hit a very vulnerable period of time. And again, it's a time when we really need to be supported to be able to look after ourselves the best we can. It's also, midlife is also about 45 to 55, maybe up to 60. This is the age of the highest suicide rate in women. And we've known that for a long, long time, but we only recently connected it to the hormonal event that's occurring. So what often happens, and this is very, very common, you start feeling terrible, not like yourself, you have different symptoms, you go to your GP, they're ill-informed, they'll say, God, life for a midlife woman, it's just so busy. You're doing so much, blah, blah, blah. Try and take some time out for yourself. Here's some antidepressants. They get thrown around pretty quickly to women, way more frequently than men. And off you go. And you're not really, it's not going to be very, very effective for a couple of reasons. That particular, if you just get told to do yoga, that's not going to, yoga's great, but it's not going to address what's going on for you hormonally. And antidepressants isn't either. And I can come back to that later because that is an important point in terms of depression during menopause and antidepressants. But, so that's what it's typically attributed to. But we really do now know that hormones play a role. Again, we've got these receptors everywhere, and that yes, there's a busy life. That's very true. All the research shows that this is the busiest period in a woman's life. But it's not just that. There's actually this neuroendocrine influence, a significant impact as well on our mental health.
Would you say then we should be taking HRT, for example, or should we be taking the gel that you can put on?
Yeah.
Estrogen gel.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So what are my thoughts on it? I've mentioned that I'm on it. I've also said it's not been miraculous. I still have had symptoms throughout. I made the mistake of mentioning that in a perimenopausal support group, Facebook group, in response to somebody saying, I've been on this and it's really not, effective. It's not helping me. And I said, well, I think you need to really make sure you're seeing a menopause-informed GP and have lots of conversations because there's lots of different doses and types and all the rest. Like there's a lot of things to try before you give up if you want to take it. But I also added, it's been helpful for me, but it's not life-changing. And I got completely bagged by all the women for who it's been life-changing. I know it's life-changing for some. I also know that I live in this space. Like this is my professional and personal world. And I can honestly say that the majority of women wouldn't be saying it's life-changing. They'd be saying it's helpful. So that's my kind of personal and professional experience. Should they be on it? Okay. That to me, women should have access to accurate information about all of the options that are available to them to help them manage their symptoms to get through this period of time. And they should have access to it. And so not just the information, they should have access to those options. And by access, I mean, it should be well stocked because we know that patches have run out many times in terms of at the chemist and stuff like that all around Australia and things. So there's just the practicality of we don't have enough stock at times, but there's also the financial implications of it. And this is expensive stuff. And some women cannot be on it because they can't afford it. And that to me just infuriates me, absolutely infuriates me. Some women also can't afford to adjust their lives in a way that would best support them. And this is a thing, again, that I can rant about, and I'll try not to, but the experience of menopause is an internal experience. As I said, it happens within us and we have symptoms, how that plays out, we've not got too much control over in terms of what you get is what you get. But we must always recognize that it's happening to us. We're living in a family situation, a friendship situation, a work situation. Like there's the social and cultural factors that influence. We know that women of colour start menopause earlier, perimenopause earlier, have it for longer and have worse symptoms. And that includes our Aboriginal Australian women as well. We know that women with an Asian background probably have the best experience you can. This is at the population level. Okay, so we've straight away got a kind of an ethnicity influence in terms of our experience, let alone the social milieu that you live in, the workplace you live in, your financial situation, your access to good health care, a husband that's helpful or not, no husband or a husband that's not helpful, whatever, family support, friendship support, all these factors are super relevant. And it gets forgotten. And I guess for me, yes, we need to do what we can to take responsibility for our own health in general, for sure, as individuals. But we can only do so much when systems are set up against us that don't actually support us in the way we ideally would be supported. Things like they've also now really worked out that our superannuation is very much affected. So not for those of us who've had children, we obviously have a period of time where we're not earning. The legislation's just changed. So when you're on maternity leave, you do get super. But nonetheless, you take a financial hit just at the absolute time you're taking time off or you're working reduced hours. You don't earn as much superannuation. And they've now recognised that it's also happening at this other end, because about 1 in 11 women, Australian women, are leaving their jobs because their symptoms are so bad that they have to. And so whereas I think the Australian Institute of Superannuation, so the body over all the funds that kind of, I guess, keeps an eye and makes sure they're doing the right thing and stuff, they have done some surveys for a long time. And women will often say things like in their surveys, I plan to work until I'm 60 or 65. But what they're finding is there is a big portion of women who are leaving the workplace much earlier. Now they're asking the question, why? And many women are citing health reasons or caring responsibilities. So we are still responsible for the care of our families, our elderly, parents, maybe siblings who become sick because, we hit an age where suddenly our friends are getting crappy diagnoses and, all of that stuff, and siblings as well. So there's all of these things kind of wrapped up in the experience of menopause that doesn't give us the freedom or, there's a variety in terms of the privileged women. And when I say privileged, what I mean is having loads of choice of how they move through these years and what supports they access. And we must remember that. And so coming back to, do you recommend MHT? So for me, what I really want is for all women, before they hit this stage, to know what this is, to know about perimenopause, to know it can start really, really early, to know that we don't know how long it goes for. Each individual won't know how long it goes for, nor how it will play out. I want them to be aware that the only thing that will kind of give you back some of your hormones is menopause hormone therapy. Nothing else will. Now, the reason I mention that is because there is some research and there's definitely some amazing gurus in this space that are saying, I'm going to be on this kind of forever because I know that having a reduction in my estrogen, my body becomes more inflamed. I'm more susceptible to all these disease states, and I want to age well. I want to have a long and healthy life and just go to sleep and not wake up. I don't want to be frail. I don't want to be sick and all that kind of stuff. And so they're saying, this is what I need. And the research does show that I need to put hormones into my body, not at the amount that I had in my fertile years, but some to kind of buffer these realities. And so I want women to know that, and I want women to understand that. On the other hand, when I speak to really well-informed people who choose not to take and use MHT, they take other measures, which we would bracket as lifestyle measures, not only to manage their symptoms, but also to do what they can to combat cardiovascular disease and frailty and, osteoporosis and all that kind of stuff. And so sadly in this area, there's quite a polarization. It's not a disease, but it's a natural stage of life, but, you're treating it like a disease. And then there's others who are like, no, it's not a disease. It is a natural part of life, but medicine can now offer some support. And in fact, there's even a query, do we call it medication? Because it is molecularly identical to what we would be producing ourselves. But nonetheless, what it is at the moment. It's prescribed as well. And they would say, no, yeah, it's natural for sure, but it has these symptoms that are challenging and it also has these health risks. Why wouldn't we make this available to women so they don't have to suffer, through the perimenopausal period and things, and so that they can maximize the chance of being healthy into old age.
So what happens, someone like myself who I've gone through it and it wasn't bad at all. So I was able to manage it. But now I have no symptoms. But now I'm thinking, well, should I be taking something even though I don't have the symptoms?
And if you see a poorly informed GP and ask that question, they could very well say, God, no. I mean, some GPs would still be thinking about a study, the Women's Health Initiative study, I think it came out in 2002, which was totally misunderstood, misrepresented. The absolute important detail of the study was just overlooked and everyone was taken off MHT. My sister's original GP still referred to that study, even though it had been debunked well and truly. The study was done on women with kind of histories of quite significant health issues. Women started MHT who started it in their 60s. A whole bunch of factors were just, completely forgotten that were very, very relevant. Also back then, hormone therapy wasn't molecularly identical to what it is now. But if you were to ask that for a poorly informed person, I would be very surprised if you got anything other than a hell no. If you've got someone who is well informed, they might say to you, yeah, okay, let's have a chat about why you want it, what the benefits are, what the risks might be. This is what we know right now. And then you tell me what your choice is. We need to be informed. Gone are the days where doctors are the absolute authority and they say yes or no. I mean, they're the ones that hold the information. Hopefully it's accurate information and communicate it to us and translate complicated stuff into words that we can understand, and we then weigh up the risks. And where this is also really relevant, for example, is for women with breast cancer, who've had breast cancer. So things like vaginal estrogen, so you've got the pessaries or you've got the cream and things, that doesn't go through the system. So it has been for a while where menopause-informed GPs would say to someone with breast cancer, if that's a symptom you have of, vaginal dryness, this is safe to take. Again, a very poorly informed person would say no. But that has been around that knowledge in the informed community has been around for a while. But it still has to be something that a woman feels comfortable to take, even though the risks are, almost negligible if you're taking estrogen vaginally to deal with vaginal dryness. Now, it doesn't help with the other stuff because it is, directly on the location kind of thing. But where we've moved to is, and having a friend who has had breast cancer at 30 and then again last year and things, this is something that she talks a lot about and has to make a decision for herself. Her oncologist is, hell no, I don't want you on estrogen. So she was put into medical menopause at 30, which is the one I mentioned before, because she had breast cancer. And then she's now gone through natural perimenopause. Her oncologist says, no, I don't want you on HRT. Yes, you can be on the vaginal stuff, but I don't want you on MHT or anything like that. But some of the menopause-informed people would have cited studies around women who have had breast cancer, who've been on systemic kind of MHT. And again, the risks are negligible. And I'm just going to try and find, I'm looking on my phone because I save these little things from time to time and see if I can find it quickly for you. It was a really good picture of the risk of something like breast cancer in a woman who's not had breast cancer before if you go on MHT. And then it was like breast cancer reoccurrence risk, what that looks like. And then if you also then added taking HRT to someone with a history of it. And it was statistically negligible. It was so...
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the thing. Statistically is very, very relevant. It's about the woman herself weighing up the quality of life that she's having with symptoms of perimenopause versus taking this risk and being on MHT. It's such a personal decision. But unfortunately, the personal decision can be removed from you if you've got a doctor who's saying, sorry, no. Now, they have a duty of care. I really understand it. You know, they can't be prescribing stuff that is truly, truly inappropriate or puts you at great risk and things. But at the same time, they do have a responsibility to inform you and allow you to make that assessment for yourself. And it's a bit like, as I said, it's people's risk profile and also their quality of life. I guess if somebody has a history of breast cancer and the symptoms are manageable for them through lifestyle, they probably wouldn't be thinking about it. Like, why add even a small risk if you're feeling like you're managing okay? But that's not everyone's experience. Some people are really suffering.
And I think it's all about being informed, isn't it?
It is.
It's really doing that research and speaking to people that know what they're talking about, because I think with GPs, we treat them like they're God and we think they know all the answers. And I have an amazing GP. I'm lucky, but I know that there are a lot out there that aren't as well informed. And, you think, well, if they say no, they say no, and you just keep going. And yeah, which I think is really sad. So speaking to someone like yourself who is so rich with knowledge, I mean, I am mind blown, and I've got all these questions to ask you, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So I'm thinking that maybe we should do another interview.
I'm happy to
go through these questions. Yeah, because I think what you've been talking about is just so worthwhile, and we need to be informed and educated this way. So would you be happy to come back and then ask these other questions that my community has come back?
Yeah.
So let's do that, because I think we needed to hear what you had to say in order to really understand these questions as well. So why don't we do a take two?
Absolutely. Gosh, we haven't even got to the psychology of perimenopause.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think what we should discuss also, which you touched on before and you wanted to speak about, is the antidepressants and using those with HRT. So, I mean, if you could talk about that, that would be great.
Oh, I'll be mindful of the time. So I guess what we're starting to also, the researchers have known for a while. So there's an amazing professor at Monash University. She heads up the Her Centre. She's a psychiatrist. The research she's been doing for a long time, which is really kind of coming to to people's attention, is the role of women's hormones on women's mental health. So she's looking very, very broadly, everything, ADHD, depression, bipolar, the whole shebang. And so she's just an amazing woman. I'm truly grateful for all the hard yards she's put in. But what she certainly discovered more in her clinical experience initially was like, this depression during perimenopause was looking different to any other time. Well, actually not any other time in a female's life. But if we talk about puberty, pregnancy, early postpartum and perimenopause, these are really unique hormonal periods of time in a woman's life. And because of that, we're actually starting to see a lot of similarities between them. One of the things that we see is that when women experience depression through their perimenopausal years, similar to particularly postpartum and adolescence, is we see this experience of irritability, or what they're kind of now calling, it used to be mummy rage, in that postpartum period. When they're now talking about menorage. Now, at other times in women's life, if they experience depression, it doesn't tend to have that anger, rage, irritability quality to it. It tends to have the teary, sad, withdrawn, lethargic kind of picture to it. And the other thing, to get a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, you have to have that picture consistently. Whereas when it happens in these really significant hormonal stages, firstly, as I said, it has that irritability through to rage where you just go to 0 to 1,000 in an instant, and often not over, seriously important things. It also isn't consistent. So you can have days where you're feeling a lot steadier, and then you can have days where you're just biting everyone's head off, the Optus guy, or standing in the line at the post office because you're waiting too long, whatever. Or the person who fills your skip bin. There's a great family story about how I lost my shit at some dude who filled my skip bin before I'd finished filling it.
It's so good to meet people like you because, I had bad road rage.
Yeah.
But you know what? You kind of want to get angry too.
I'm ready for it. I'm liking it.
Yes, same. I'm like, bring it on.
Yeah. I'm speaking up a heck of a lot more. But because of those two different features, which I said, kind of the anger feature and also the fact that it's not day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, it again is often it is overlooked or it's misdiagnosed. And what Professor Kulkarni kind of really started to see was, hang on a minute, this is hormonally driven. And so when a depression has such a hormonal kind of instigator, then we often find that the typical antidepressant isn't as effective. I mean, antidepressants, bad news, it's the rates of success and all the rest of antidepressants aren't that great to begin with, but particularly not when it's in response to what we're now calling kind of a hormonal depression. And in that instance, women are far better off in that instance to be taking hormone therapy. It's going to have a bigger impact. Now, sometimes, particularly if you've had a prior history of major depressive disorder or a prior history of postpartum, or that, whether it's hormonal or not hormonal, sometimes you might need to be on MHT and also an antidepressant. But a bit like I was talking about before with the kind of MHT and ADHD medication, it's more effective when it's together. So the first line of treatment, the recommendation now for a hormonal depression during peri is to be trying MHT. Seeing how that goes, fiddling with that, exhausting every option. If it's still not quite right, then adding an antidepressant to the picture as well. And it's I'm a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. We don't have prescribing rights. I don't want them and things. But, obviously in my profession, we've got people coming to see us who are on all sorts of medication for various mental health issues. So we've got to have some kind of basic understanding of it. But it's often where, again, the ill-informed GP will just, like mine did, put me on antidepressants, and it didn't, I didn't get any benefit and I got the side effects. So at the same time, with all of this, back to that MHT, should people be on it? You can't outrun. MHT can't fix the bad relationship you've been in. It can't fix the people-pleasing patterns that most women have and self-sacrifice patterns. It doesn't fix you've got a asshole boss that, you still have to be around. By midlife, we've collected a lot of experiences, some of which we've dealt with, some not. And then also midlife is really busy. So MHT can only do so much. So people need to keep their expectations in check. As I said, it can be helpful for some, it can be amazing, but it is a broader issue of what am I bringing to perimenopause. My naturopath said to me, Kirstin, perimenopause is a time of reckoning. How you've lived your life up until now is going to reveal itself in your perimenopause. You can't outrun those 2-3 wines that you have every night. We know alcohol's particularly bad during perimenopause and terrible for hot flushes and stuff. So, yeah.
No. It's such a shame, isn't it? Because
you really need it.
Having a glass of wine. Yeah, you do. We go for that, don't we? We need something to make ourselves feel good. But, yeah, what do you do? But I found this conversation so interesting and I would love to keep going. So I think definitely let's do a take 2, because there are so many questions and I'm reading them thinking, yes, I want to know the answer to all of these. So yeah, let's bring you back on.
Very, very happy to do that.
Thank you for giving your time and your expertise. I am blown away by a lot of this.
My absolute pleasure.
Yeah, we need more people like you to educate us because, like I said, there's so many of us in the dark. And here I was thinking, I know a lot about it, but actually I don't. I really don't. You have really informed me and taught me a lot. So, yeah, I can't wait for you to answer these questions in our next episode.
Hey.
So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll speak soon.
Shall do.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of Your Second Act. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could rate and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to me.